Hellraiser, a franchise that has continued and continued, standing the test of time. Not too dissimilar to Halloween, Friday the 13th, and A Nightmare on Elm Street. With these iconic horror franchises being rebooted, many always say, what about Clive Barker? Will he return to the Hellraiser universe? The universe that he created in The Hellbound Heart and its adaptation, Hellraiser. He actually did return to it, so to speak. He was asked in 2014 to write a script for a remake of Hellraiser. I've done 2 videos on it currently, and today I want to return to that script and discuss some more elements. If you want to see Pinhead's new origin and creation, I'll link that video in the description box down below. Today I want to take a look at Frank, very specifically his involvement in the film and how Clive Barker doubles down on what was hinted at in Hellraiser and further shown in Hellraiser 2. The incestuous tones between Frank and Kirsty. Frank in the original is someone we see at the start, performing a ritual of sorts, tracking his fingers over the lament configuration and caressing it, searching for the dark truths hidden within. We then, of course, see the result of that searching, and only later, when his brother Larry bleeds all over the floor of his attic, that we see him again, returning from the hellish dimension of the Cenobites, clawing his way back and having to feed off of blood and the flesh of the living to rebuild himself. We do see some bits and pieces and hints of Frank being perverse towards Kirsty, but it's not out and out stated. However, in this remake script, he really goes all out. In the remake script, we are first introduced to Frank as Larry and Julia move into their family home. Frank is upstairs in the attic. As the workmen are unloading things into rooms and doing some work to the walls and fixtures, Larry and Julia are discussing their relationship on the landing when a workman approaches, stating they have a problem in the attic that they will want to see. Larry, of course, heads upstairs. As they head up the stairway, the workman continues, saying how they just wanted to strip the walls and they couldn't. He was just in there. The place needs to be empty for them to carry out the work. As we approach the attic, daytime outside, the workman continues and says how it isn't safe. As they cross the threshold, this is where we see Frank for the first time. A human, living in his parents' house in the attic. He sits there on a mattress on the floor, writing in a journal, the contents of which we will get back to shortly. Of course, he and Larry have an exchange, and we can feel the tension between the two. Larry annoyed at seeing his brother here, Frank smiling. Larry turns to him and asks if he broke in. As he does this, we get to see the room that Frank calls home. Illustrations all over the walls, the floor, food wrappers and drink bottles everywhere. The illustrations from his journal are all obscene, the specifics of which are not delved into in the script, but we do see some patterns of the lament configuration and an island, a map, a detailed map of Devil's Island. For those that aren't aware, this is actually the location that the lament configuration was created and where Pinhead was also created in this remake script. Frank in this script looks as he does in the original movie, the description of which is basically the same. Frank states how he is only going to be there for a while, not so much asking his brother if he can stay, but more so assuming he can. He does, however, ask his brother, condescendingly, from what I can gather from the script, if his brother can do him just this little favour. The relationship that they have is obviously tested, tired and worn at this point. Larry says to Frank how he never changes, to which Frank simply replies, "Love you too." As that happens, Julia walks in, talking to Larry and trailing off as she notices Frank. In the remake script, Julia is still infatuated with him. As they look at one another, we cut to a flashback. Julia and Frank in an apartment. Frank, rough with Julia, putting his brother down and having his way with Julia. The language in the script is much harder than the original movie, and some of the stuff I obviously cannot say for obvious reasons. The flashback seems to show the first time Frank took Julia. We cut to the attic once more. Larry asks if it's okay for his brother to stay, and she says yes, of course. Larry, trying to lighten the mood, says how it's the first time they've all been together since, and then Frank interjects, the wedding. And we cut to another flashback to show just how depraved and awful this person is. Frank is there, Julia in her wedding dress, and Frank, he had his brother's wife on their wedding day. Frank is portrayed as an incredibly manipulative man in this script, noticing if someone is buying his lies and pushing, twisting, making people do what he wants. Julia being the main person he manipulates, of course, due to the fact she out and out states how much she loves him. The script moves on with some more interaction, but what's really telling is when Kirsty learns Frank is there. She shakes her head, clearly not happy with it, even looking up towards the attic, lingering glances. Did Frank perhaps abuse Kirsty? Potentially. It's not stated here, but the response from her isn't one of a niece to an uncle. And later, we see Frank come back from the dead in a similar way as before, but let's talk about the ritual first. He sits on the floorboards of the attic, just as he did before in the original movie. However, for some reason, he's just in his underwear this time. He has a camera at his side, not actually explained why it's there, but it is there. And he has a display stand in front of him, something old, hand-carved. Atop it stands various symbols and totems, religious items. The script states that it covers all bases. Abrahamic to the ancient blood faiths, it is all there. He has candles around the display, but not around him, and it creates an ominous hue over the man's face as he plays with something in his hands. The puzzle box. The lament configuration. As he plays with the box, running his hands over it, it begins to activate, playing a little tune. Mechanisms whirring to life. A bell tolls in the distance. And again. He now notices it on the second toll, turning, trying to seek its source. Everything goes quiet and we see the box opening. As this happens, the bell stops. We hear a high-pitched whine and vines begin to grow beside him, out of the floorboards. Light burns through the walls and suddenly he notices it isn't just his shadow on the wall. There is someone here with him, behind him. He asks, "Hello? Who are you?" And before he can finish, a needle pierces his neck. He's paralyzed. He tries to scream, tries to run, but he can't. The vines begin to grow around him. His skin starts to crack as if it were shrinking, ripping as it's pulled inwards. And he's gone, pulled inwards on himself. The death of Frank is perhaps the most gruesome part of the remake, and when he returns though, again, this is where we get Frank and Kirsty's relationship. The awkward and awful incestuous nature of it all comes to light. The return of Frank is pretty identical to the original, so there's not really any need to go into it, much in the same way as how he replenishes himself. It's all very much the same. There is some more manipulation between him and Julia though. Julia sees him and initially is so terrified, even when she realizes it's Frank. She doesn't want to help him. Not until he lures her with promises of love. The reason he returned was love, their love. And she needs to help him so that they can be together like they always wanted. Like she always wanted. There is some interesting dialogue though that reveals the lament configuration as a key. He calls it their key, which I guess is just a reference to it being the doorway, the key to their dimension, so to speak. He also says how it wasn't enough. What this means absolutely is not clear, but it's potentially referencing the blood that spills on the floor, or maybe something to do with the key, something to do with what they did to him in hell, so as he could still return. It's not until the end of the movie, again, very much like in the original, where Kirsty and Frank meet. And when this happens, it's incredibly clear Frank intends to do disgusting things to Kirsty. As Kirsty walks into the attic, Julia covered in blood, Frank half replenished, Frank walks forward. Little Kirsty, haven't you blossomed? As he says this, Frank lunges forward and grabs her. Shh, little girl, shh. Kirsty, obviously disgusted, panicking, begs, "Don't hurt me." Frank replies, "Oh, it will only hurt for a moment, but I promise to your remains once I'm done, if that's any consolation." Clearly saying that he is going to use Kirsty to replenish himself even further and then perform necrophilia. There's also another line later on, once Frank is wearing Larry's skin, where Frank says to Kirsty to give Daddy a kiss. A similar line in Hellraiser, and then the cherry on top, the creme de la creme, as Kirsty runs off, he says, "Oh, baby girl, no need to run, I only want to wear your as a necktie." Frank, in this version of Hellraiser, is evil. Out and out evil. He dispatches Julia with a knife, slicing her abdomen, saying she's outlived her usefulness. Interestingly enough though, hell in this universe is very, very different to the one that we saw before. We close the movie, the script, with Pinhead overseeing Frank and Julia, psychotically happy in hell, living an eternity with Frank, like she always wanted, but in the most sadistic of ways. They are destined to kill each other, over and over until the end of time itself. And there you have it, Frank Cotton, well, the new Frank Cotton in this Hellraiser remake. I would really be keen to hear your thoughts on this, because for me, I like the fact that he's much more sinister, but the overly sexual and incestuous nature is just that little bit too much for me. I feel personally that he can be portrayed as evil outside of those comments, and if anything, they actually detract from the story and characterization just a little bit. But guys, please do drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button to stay up to date on all the world of pop culture and movie news, and this, the series in which I explore and dissect the script for the Hellraiser remake that we will never ever see. Also, I just want to say thank you so much for the response to my previous 2 videos on it. I've really appreciated that. It's been a long time since I've been delving into the Hellraiser universe, so it's great to see all of those people enjoying the content. So thank you so much. Anyway, and as always, I've been Mr. H. Until next time, take care.